Now, the Financial Services Consumer Panel, I think, was the first of its type to be established. The second one was what was then called the Ofcom Consumer Panel. It's now called the Communications Consumer Panel. And our next speaker is Chris Holland, who had the almost impossible job of replacing me as a member for England on the panel. But he's done a brilliant job, as you will be very aware when you hear him speak. So a welcome to Chris Holland, please.
Thank you, Roger. Not almost impossible, impossible, I think I would suggest. Around the world, thought will fly in the twinkling of an eye. That was the prophecy of Mother Shipton, a 16th century soothsayer from Yorkshire, who it seems to me got it about right, because today a thought, an idea, a message, a song, a book, a film, a transaction, and so many other things can fly around the world in the twinkling of an eye, providing that is that the means of communication is available, reliable and affordable. And Mother Shipton left that bit out, so I don't think she'd have found a place on the consumer panel. Communication binds humanity together. Without it, we're isolated and even excluded. We're less able to access information and advice, less able to summon help, less able to discover things and engaged with the world around us. To shamelessly steal a phrase from the excellent paper accompanying today's conference, communication services are essential to quality of life and social inclusion. But communications itself isn't that lump of plastic in your pocket with all the wizardry contained within it, or that magic super fast broadband fibre thingy that we all talk about so much. It's this ability to stay in touch, to participate, to benefit, to flourish, to bind humanity together. So communications products and services are therefore the means to that end. They allow us and enable us to communicate, which is why the work of the panel is so important and why it's a privilege to be involved with it. So as Roger said, I'm Chris Holland, a panel member, and today I've been asked to talk about our work, how we go about it, some of the strengths and limitations of the panel, and some of the issues currently occupying us. So first, a few words about the work of the panel. Our work flows from our objective, which in summary is to protect and promote the interests of consumers, citizens, micro-businesses in the communications sector by giving advice to Ofcom, the EU, well, at least for the time being, governments, industry and others. And the others gives us plenty of scope. Just to give you some top-level information about the panel, we were established in 2003 under the Communications Act. We are independent. We have 8 members supported by a small executive team, and we have cross-membership with ACOD, Ofcom's Advisory Committee for Older and Disabled People. We have a unique relationship with the regulator, and I'm going to use that phrase again, sometimes described as a critical friend to Ofcom. We provide robust and independent advice on policies and projects, not only once they're being implemented, but crucially early on in their development. We can do this because we have privileged access to often sensitive information that isn't available to anyone else. This helps us make early, higher quality interventions so that we can ensure that the consumer and citizen interest is at the heart of Ofcom's thinking from the very beginning. Nobody else does that in this way, and all the feedback we get suggests it's valued enormously and that the panel's influence does come through in Ofcom's consumer work. And based on our insight, expertise and experience, we work with a range of other stakeholders, including government departments, communications providers, the European Commission and various other consumer bodies. Now, we produce an annual plan which has 4 elements. Our key areas of engagement, which this year are broadband and mobile coverage, nuisance calls, treating customers fairly, which includes customer service and complaints handling, digital engagement and postal services. We usually have a couple of pieces of research on the go during the course of each year, and as well as publishing these as useful information sources, we use our findings with our regular meetings with Ofcom and communications providers to highlight the issues that bear on the consumer experience. Our research also provides evidence, for example, highlighting the unmet needs of many micro businesses, the poor state of complaint escalation and access to independent redress, and customer service experiences of older and disabled consumers. And we'll shortly be publishing our research on consumer attitudes to the use of personal data. And later this year, we're going to take a look at access to broadcast and on-demand content in terms of subtitling. We also keep a number of issues under review, far too many to list here, but probably 9 or 10 issues at any one time. And we have our ACOD-specific work areas, which cover inclusion and accessibility, hence our upcoming research on subtitling, and portrayal and participation in terms of broadcast content. In formulating our plan, we try to apply two tests. What's the scale of the issue for consumers, and what difference can the panel and ACOB make? And we always consult on our plan as we're developing it. Now, in practice, the main elements of the way we work are monthly meetings, which are attended by a variety of senior Ofcom people and often external stakeholders, according to the topic. We have a memorandum of understanding with Ofcom, which underpins the unique relationship I mentioned earlier, and which allows us early and confidential access to their thinking, which in turn allows us to advise, challenge and monitor on a regular basis. The MOU supplements the Communications Act and affirms the independence of the panel from Ofcom. It's designed to ensure an effective, efficient and transparent working relationship between us and enable the panel to provide high quality evidence-based advice. We have regular meetings with all the main communications providers, and as we heard earlier, they do take these sessions very seriously, and they tell us that our input helps them better scrutinise some of their own processes or provides useful evidence to support change within their organisations. And I have to say it also keeps them on their toes because we shine a light in some very dark corners sometimes. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that under Ofcom's general conditions, providers are required to consult the panel to ensure that the interests of disabled users are taken into account. We've never had to invoke that condition yet, as they do it willingly, but it does help to know that it's there. Alongside this, we have ad hoc meetings with other stakeholders on specific topics. We sit on Ofcom's national advisory committees. We take part in speaking events, such as today. And we always attend the Consumer Forum for Communications, chaired by Roger. Our Secretariat gathers information to keep our members up to date. We communicate outwardly via a website, blogs and a monthly bulletin. And perhaps most important and visible, we respond in detail to a great many consultations and calls for inputs, an average of one every 2 weeks. And finally, our members are very active in between meetings, with a significant amount of work being done electronically. So, we're a very busy panel. We work exceptionally well as a team, we work collaboratively with stakeholders, and we are challenging to the regulator and to communications providers, where we're unfailingly professional and courteous in our approach, but also uncompromising on behalf of consumers. In short, there are no easy rides. So just let's take a look at our strengths and limitations, some of which I've already touched on. Our strengths include true independence. We're independent of thought and independent of Ofcom, so we're beholden to no one and free to act as we see fit without fear or favour. And our single sector specialism keeps us unencumbered and focused on good customer outcomes, and we've got nothing that distracts us from that purpose. At the same time, we have our members' collective broad range of expertise and experience from other areas such as finance, small business, broadcasting and customer service and so on. And we have that unique critical friend relationship with the regulator that I've already mentioned, and I touched on the reasons why this is important earlier. But our ability to respond before and during policy formulation due to the access that we have is a key strength. We're diverse in our makeup. We have the ability to influence debates and other stakeholders based on reputation, trust and credibility. And the fact that we meet frequently is also a strength. It's easier to keep momentum going and respond to unexpected turns of events. It is, I think, as well, perhaps, a strength that we're different to a campaigning group. We give an alternative, complementary approach and perspective on common consumer interests. Moving on to our limitations, which in my experience with 5.5 years on the panel now are far outweighed by our strengths. Did I get that the right way round? No, as our strengths far outweigh our limitations. I'm just checking you're all paying attention. We're limited by resources, especially when considering the scope of our work. Like all of us working on behalf of consumers, we'd like to do even more. As it is, we are to a large extent relying on the goodwill of our panel members and indeed our executive support team, whose work rate and quality constantly amazes me. And save for the requirement I mentioned earlier for providers to consult the panel, we have no formal legal powers, and thus there is, I suppose, a theoretical risk that we could be ignored. I couldn't actually think of an example where that's happened. Our advice isn't always taken, but it's never ignored. And of course, we have the robust MOU in place to help ensure we can work effectively. Lastly, it's hard to measure our success. The work areas are long-term, often interdependent, and benefit from the involvement of a range of stakeholders. And without going into great detail, some of the issues occupying us at the moment are customer service and complaints handling, how vulnerable consumers are supported, automatic compensation, the broadband universal service obligation, mobile coverage, switching, nuisance calls, postal quality service and subtitling on video and demand services. The conference paper rightly highlights the challenges inherent in reflecting consumer and citizens' voice in policy development. So I should mention that the panel, with invaluable help from Roger and from Claire Milne, who's in the audience today, did some work on the way in which Ofcom consults, and we're very pleased to see some of the recommendations being used, particularly on the promotion of consultations and the use of plain English. One of our key recommendations was for Ofcom to create a mailing list to enable interested parties to be notified of consultations it has underway. And we're delighted they've done that. Do sign up if you're interested. So to conclude, today's conference is both timely and important. And reflecting on the conference title, how can the consumer voice be better heard in the regulation of essential services, I think there might be a parallel question of how can regulators and consumer bodies work better for consumers. And part of the answer to both questions surely involves a combination of the models outlined in the conference paper. They all have their strengths and limitations. Individually and collectively, the trick is to make the most of the strengths and mitigate the limitations. And as with most of life's challenges, there is no perfect answer and no single solution. If only we could see into the future. Mother Shipton, where are you when we need you most? But in the meantime, there's some details how you can look at what the panel is up to. Thank you very much for listening.